Washing machines have them, computers have them, even toasters have them. Most everything we have has them, but not people, and especially not children. I am talking about a user's guide. When we buy a washing machine, there is a user's guide that tells how to care for and manage the product. It tells us what to do and what not to do. It even has a troubleshooting section that provides useful suggestions when things go wrong. But there is no user's guide for the children with whom we work. Wouldn't it be nice if there were a user's guide that came with the children with whom we worked? Wouldn't it be great if there were a user's guide that could serve as a reference when things begin to go wrong? Well, there is no reason why we couldn't have a user's guide, especially for our students with problematic behaviors. This presentation is a guide to creating user's guides. However, before getting into the nuts and bolts of developing a user's guide for children, a few points need to be made. The first is that whatever else, the focus of the plan is on the child, not the teacher, not the paraeducator, and not the administrator. Things are happening to the student, and it is the student that will have to live with the effects. Sometimes we educators feel that we are the victims, but the reality is that we are not. Yes, our lives can be affected by the misbehavior of our students, but that is only in the short term. We get to go home at the end of the day and leave the child behind. Even with the more long-term cases, we know that there is an end point, be it at the end of the year or when the student leaves the public school system. However, the student with the misbehaviors can't leave them at the end of the day or when leaving the public school system. That child will carry the consequences and scars for his or her entire life. Shouldn't we work to develop a learning environment that improves the child's life and future rather than maintaining an environment that degrades it even further? We often make the case in special education that behavior is a form of communication. That case continues to be relevant when developing a user's guide. However, the focus of the user's guide is less on instruction of more appropriate behaviors than it is on listening to the child's ongoing behavior so that we adults can make appropriate responses. Thus, we have to look closely at the nuances of the behavior to make sure that communication is really taking place. A third point to be made is that a user's guide tries to be proactive. Though it does include graduated interventions should the child's behavior escalate, the real focus is to read the behavior signs that will give us warning so we can intervene well before things get out of control. This means that the user's guide needs to be readily available and frequently used. The guide is not a static document to be tucked away in a file and forgotten. It is a document that is changing and evolving. As the student changes over time, so does the nature of the behaviors. Interventions that worked at one point in time may not work at another. Entirely new interventions may have to be developed to meet new needs. The user's guide will need to change to reflect the changing student. Equally important is that once created, it should be readily available to everyone with whom the child works. This would include teachers, paraeducators, and substitutes. It is designed to be a well-used document. The final point is that the user's guide is a collaborative document. One person sitting at a desk cannot create it. It requires the shared experiences of those who know and interact with the child. This includes teachers, paraeducators, administrators, and very importantly, the parents. It is only by sharing experiences that we get an idea of the dynamics of the behavior, the warning signs that something is going amiss, the interventions that have worked and have not worked, and the motivators that help keep things moving. The concept of the user's guide is really very simple. It consists of 2 sheets of paper divided into columns into which specific information is listed so that the reader can easily and quickly get the needed information to deal with the developing problem. The idea is to get a picture of what the child is like when things are going well, what kinds of things will keep the student on an even keel, the behavioral indicators that things are breaking down, and what kinds of things we need to be doing to prevent a downward slide. A user's guide can be used as a positive behavioral support plan, though it typically does not include an instructional element. Or it may be used as part of or in conjunction with a positive behavioral support plan. Let's take a closer look at its elements using a guide developed for the student, AD. The first column is a brief description of what AD is like when things are going well. This is perhaps the most difficult column to complete. We tend to focus so much on the misbehaviors that we overlook AD's positive side. The fact of the matter is that AD, like most students, acts appropriately most of the time. It's just that when he misbehaves, he really misbehaves. This column is placed first so it can help us focus on AD's positive aspects and help to remind us of the target, to increase the amount of time that AD is behaving appropriately. In this example, when things are going well for AD, he can be cheerful, happy, willing to listen, and he wants others to pay attention to him. Once we have a picture in our mind of what AD is like when things are going smoothly, we want to create a list of known motivators, or those things that help him do what needs to be done. Items on the list do not have to work all the time. They just need to work sufficiently often to be worth a try. There are very few, if any, motivators that work all the time. We want to create a list with a good number of motivators so that we have a number of possible options depending on the specific circumstances. According to AD's user guide, he enjoys reading. If for some reason reading is not an option or is not achieving the desired results, then we can switch to another motivator, listening to his personal CD player. The next column that is addressed is what kinds of supports need to be in place to help maintain AD's appropriate behaviors. As with the motivators, we do not want to rely on just one or two supports. The more supports we can provide, the greater the probability that AD will maintain his appropriate behaviors. Thus, according to his user's guide, a visual schedule is important, as is plenty of warning if there is going to be a change in that schedule. He will also need frequent breaks and a snack, such as some fruit or a granola bar. Notice that there is a procedure on how to give corrections, a necessary part of daily instruction. By incorporating these support strategies, AD's life, as well as our own, can be made much easier. It should be noted that the use of these strategies will not guarantee the elimination of problematic behaviors, but they should be helpful in reducing both their frequency and intensity. The next column provides a list of things to avoid doing, as they will tend to increase the likelihood of misbehaviors. Looking at the list of things to avoid, it would seem that AD is easily overwhelmed and cannot take on too many things at once. Hence, it is difficult for him to process information when two or more people are talking to him at once. He doesn't know how to deal with downtime. Thus, have a backup assignment or activity for him to do once he finishes one activity or is stuck and is waiting for help. By knowing what kinds of things to avoid, it becomes easier to develop instructional programs and a learning environment that will support and nurture AD. Once we understand what kinds of supports AD needs and the things we want to avoid, the next step is to identify the triggers that initiate his misbehaviors. In many respects, this is an elaboration of the previous lists of things to avoid. The only real difference is that items on this list have a track record of initiating behaviors, whereas items on the previous lists will increase AD's anxiety and help set the stage for triggers to become activated. If we understand the triggers to misbehaviors, we can work to minimize their potency. For example, we know that if the demands we place on AD exceed his ability level, then he will have an increased probability of misbehaving. As a result, we need to make sure that he is able to do the work assigned. He may need assistance and scaffolding to do it until mastered, but it will still be within his grasp. We also know, according to the list, that increased classroom noise can be a trigger. Thus, we may need to monitor his anxiety level in a noisy setting and prepare to intervene in some way to either reduce the noise or give him a quiet place to go. Of course, misbehaviors do not occur in a vacuum, nor do they just spontaneously happen. Students give warning signs that a misbehavior is pending. Sometimes these warnings are overt and obvious. Sometimes they are subtle and easily overlooked. This is where a group approach is especially useful. By working together and sharing experiences, it is often possible to list out those signals, both obvious and subtle, that indicate an impending misbehavior. It has been noted, for example, that AD will increase his pacing when he is ready to blow. His voice may increase in volume and rate. He may refuse to work on his assignments, or he may have a mischievous look about him as he scans the room. By being aware of these signs, it is possible to intervene before the misbehavior occurs and de-escalate the situation. The next column provides suggestions on what to do when the warning signs are noted. Most of the interventions to be used with AD deal with the manner in which the staff interacts with him. The use of a calm, quiet voice, redirecting by referring to the schedule, asking if he is okay, or having him stop work and listen to his headphones for a short period of time are all easy interventions that can head off a potential behavioral problem. The important point is that those working with him understand the warning signs and intervene at that point rather than wait for the misbehavior to fully express itself. Sometimes, in spite of our best efforts, AD's misbehaviors will escalate. When this happens, specific interventions designed to de-escalate the situation need to be instituted. Again, a collaborative effort is needed that draws on the experiences of those who have worked with him. Since we know from the column of things to avoid that invading his personal space is not a good idea, it will be especially important to stay a respectable distance away from him. We also know that increasing his vestibular input can sometimes reduce the tension. Sometimes he needs to sit in a chair with nothing to do so he can have time to collect himself. There will be times when AD's behavior will escalate to the point to where there are no interventions to be done, and we just have to write it out. However, once the crisis is over, the team needs to get together, review the steps that led up to the crisis, and then make any changes as needed to the user's guide. According to this guide, it will also be important to review with AD about the events that led to the crisis and what he could have done differently. Although AD has behavioral issues that impact both his life and ours, we need to remember that he needs our help, especially when things are not going very well. The user's guide is one way to provide the systematic structure and support that he needs. It is likely that AD will need more, such as specific behavioral instruction and problem solving, but the user's guide can play a very important role in organizing our experiences and assuring that everyone has the same information and knows what to do to establish and maintain an effective learning environment.